My name is Peter Lehto, and I work as a Vaadin expert and a trainer with the Vaadin Ltd. Back in Turku, Finland. And my very good buddy here, Josh Long.
Hi, I'm Josh Long. I'm the developer advocate for the open source Spring technologies at Pivotal. How many of you have heard of Spring? Oh, yeah, okay, that works. Good.
Cool. Yeah, so let's move directly to our today's agenda. So we'll try to establish you a path on technologies, how we can fly that thing with a web app framework combined with Spring Boot backend. And we'll start that by just seeing what is Vaadin, how it uses GWT, and what are the main benefits of the actual framework. Then,
how many of you use Vaadin? Okay, so the rest of you are GWT, pure play GWT?
Yeah.
Okay, okay, groovy, just making sure.
Cool. Then Josh will tell you something about the Spring Boot, the latest and greatest additions of the Spring framework, and after which we'll a little bit see with an add-on called Vaadin for Spring how to actually integrate these two technologies together. After which we will talk about the actual drone, and if we have time, we'll see how you can get started with the development of these technologies. Anyway, there were several Vaadin developers, or at least people who had used Vaadin. How many of you are aware of the actual origin of the name? Same guys. Okay, great. So it's a Finnish word for a reindeer. And if you, for example, look at the logo and tilt it 90 degrees to the side, you'll see the horns of the reindeer, which in a way also resembles the web application development and Java and all these good stuff. But more seriously, Vaadin is a user interface framework for building rich web applications. So what that really means and what that gives us is two main sort of value propositions. Another one is the developer productivity. So we're mainly working always on the server side. Well, not in every case, but the traditional way of using Vaadin is a server-centric web framework approach. And the developer productivity on the server side is, in many cases, very much more high level than what it would be if you always had to work with just pure client-side GWT. And well, as we've seen today in a couple of presentations, the compiler is getting better, the compilation times are decreasing, there's incremental compilations, but still, many developers value the productivity they gain by using Vaadin. Another thing is the rich user experience. So Vaadin comes bundled with very large amount of, let's say, components and widgets that the developers can directly start using in their day-to-day work. If we make a little comparison between standard GWT and Vaadin, we might say that in normal GWT applications, the application logic is executed in the web browser. So the UI would remain in the browser, web browser side. And the UI would be implemented with widgets. And for that, you would create the look and feel with a proper theming that you wanted to have for your application. At some point, you will, of course, want to talk with the server backend for your actual backend or data persistency system. And for that, you might, for example, use GWT RPC. So here you are implementing sort of backend services for or ways to access your backend through different services so that you mainly have a service for every different thing you want to do. With Vaadin, things usually go quite a bit different way. So we start from the server, thinking about how to build the UI that really works and corresponds the actual business logic that our backend is trying to achieve. And this UI is then made up by using Vaadin components, which have the built-in GWT widgets delivered with the framework, so that the developers can actually use the API of the components, create their UI with that, so that the actual application logic stays securely on the server side, and we're just using GWT widgets which don't know anything about the actual application logic, automatically bundled with the components. And of course, on top of this, we can then create our own theming mechanisms just the way we want. There's also possibility to use different kind of hybrid approaches where we have part of the UI running in the browser, partly in the web server, but let's not just today concentrate them that much. What Vaadin really gives you, what is the developer experience or the look and feel of the standard Vaadin? Vaadin just recently released a version that comes with a parameterizable theme engine called Palo, and just with few different parameter changes, you can quite heavily customize the look and feel of your standard Vaadin components. So this is the standard Palo theme look and feel for the basic core Vaadin distribution that you can download and access in your project today. So how does the Vaadin then really work? Let's say that for controlling our drone here, we, for example, made a special widget called jog dial, which tries to emulate the jog dial controls of the gamepad. And mainly we're doing this because we might want to fly the drone, let's say from an iPad, and there we want to receive, for example, a touch events from the device, which we will then transport over the network to the actual Vaadin server side. So how would we make a simple application like this with Vaadin on the server-side code? Is that we might introduce the jog dial component and two text fields, X and Y correspondingly. We could add a value change listener called move listener to jog dial that sets the X and Y coordinates to the actual text fields. After which we will add the components into the layout of our Vaadin server-side UI. So when the user then accesses the web page, he will initially get a custom sort of HTML loader page that contains all the instructions on how to, for example, load the widget set that contains the client-side representations of the components, as well as all the theme and graphical assets. This can be reduced all the way down to the approximately 135 Ks with different kind of reduction technologies or techniques. And this is something that is usually called a thin client of the actual UI. This would then render the components on the screen in the web browser and wait for user interaction. So if, for example, user uses his mouse or whatever pointing device or maybe the gamepad just to click on the actual jog dial, what would happen is that we'll send an event over a Vaadin transportation mechanism to the server side, which will then be listened by the actual click listener, mutating the state of the Vaadin server-side application, and as a response, we would get the changes that occurred on the server side, which would then automatically update the position and values of the components on the actual client browser. Let's say that from the class diagram point of view, what we're doing is that we on the server side have a jog dial component, which has a corresponding pure with widget on the client side called jog dial widget. And what Vaadin allows us to do is a special connector component that gets compiled as part of the widget set, which is the actual glue between the server and the client side. From the server side, we can change something called search state, which practically is the state of the server-side component that can be serialized and passed to the actual client-side implementation. We can also, when, for example, there's some interaction with the client browser, send an RPC from the browser back to the server side just to notify about some interaction that the user has been doing. And RPC also works the other direction if necessary. About the developer productivity, so in this case, all you have to know is the actual jog dial component on the server side. And this is one of the key benefits of Vaadin, just to be able to ignore all the other, let's say, lower level or lower abstraction level parts of the actual framework, unless you don't want to modify them. What about the Spring then?
Right, okay. Right, so we're going to take a quick look at Spring Boot so that you have some sort of context by which to judge what you're about to see. How many of you have heard, by show of hands, about Spring Boot? 1, 2, 3, anybody? Okay, 3, good. Come on. Oh, it's up there. That is awkward. That is not great. Okay, good stuff. Oh, I'm so glad we sorted this out beforehand.
Yeah.
Yep. Fabu. Okay, so Spring Boot is a, how many, so show of hands again, how many of you are using Spring? Just want to make sure we're on the same page. Okay, so Spring Boot is a way of simplifying application development. It's an entry point into building Spring applications for today. As you know, Spring is nothing if not very, very, very comprehensive. But that can be something of a stumbling block for people who are just getting started. They don't know where to start. So Spring Boot is that entry point. 1743, so okay, yeah. So there's a lot of different ways to get started. I would recommend that you go to start.spring.io and you'll hit this web page. This is sort of this is code generation. Don't freak out, okay? I just said the bad word, but it's not that bad. It's going to generate a tiny, insignificant little zip file. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and say group is going to be org test. It's going to be artifact. These are normal Maven pro forma kind of things. Coordinates. Give it a name, a project description, the package, like so, for the win, okay. Choose the Maven project or Gradle project, okay. Choose a jar or war. It's 2015. How many of you guys know that? Just making sure we're on the same page. So I'm not going to choose war because of what I just said, right? Java 1.8, so we support Java 1.6, 1.7, 1.8. Again, you're more than free to play in traffic, and you're more than free to use Java 1.6. I don't recommend either, but we do support it. How many of you are using 1.6, by the by? Just curious. I ask because I care. I'm here for you. Java 1.6 is end of life. I'm just going to put that out there. I'm going to leave that there. Okay, 1.8, here we are. Choose your language, Groovy or Java. Obviously, both are spectacular. I'm going to choose Java in this case. Spring Boot, latest and greatest. And then you have these options. These are sort of the checkboxes you check that indicate the kind of workload you're trying to support with your Spring app. So in the interest of having something that's relatable to everybody, I'm going to choose boring old JPA here, although I could just as easily have chosen Mongo or Redis or Solr or Elasticsearch or straight up JDBC. I'm going to build a web app. I'm going to give this to my operations people, and I don't want them to give me in exchange the finger, so I'm going to go ahead and integrate operations friendliness, hit that, and then I'm going to hit generate. Okay, that'll give me a quick little zip file here. Go, go, go. Command V, Vaadin. Okay, unzip. And what I get is a directory structure. I'm going to open this up in my IDE. Either one, any one, How many of you, and again, you're among friends, nobody's judging. How many of you use NetBeans? Anybody? Anybody? Where's that one guy who always follows me? Okay, well, just wanted to know if he was here. How many of you use Eclipse? All good. Okay, how many of you use IntelliJ? How many of you are like real men and use V or Vim? Yeah, okay. Okay, so this is IntelliJ. It's a thing. Maven build, I do this under duress. I could have just as easily have chosen STS or Eclipse or whatever. The build is already kind of a step forward. So these are opinionated starter dependencies. Each one of these corresponds more or less to the checkbox that we saw on the website. So this is all you need to get started with JPA. This is all you need to get started with building REST APIs and so on. These are operation-friendly bits. And this is the unit testing. You notice that we didn't actually check that checkbox on the website because unit testing, that's all. I mean, there's no reason. You need unit testing. It's not even an option. So that's there. Otherwise, it's just a very boring build file. It points to a parent POM that Spring Boot provides. It provides everything you need. It's a level set for all the dependencies you're likely going to use. So it doesn't just specify the integration libraries for Spring that work together, for example, Spring Security and Spring Framework and Spring Batch and integration and Spring Data. But it also level sets all the other dependency versions for common ecosystem libraries like Hibernate and Commons Logging and SLF4J and JPA and Servlet Spec and all that stuff. So we've taken the pain out of leveling all these dependencies. You can relax and know that if you bring in those common dependencies that the versions are known to work well together, so you don't have to play whack-a-mole with dependencies that are out of range, What you get is a very, very sort of empty directory structure. You have a basic unit test. Okay, you're welcome. You have an empty templates directory, empty static directory, empty property file, and an empty public static void main entry point class. Can you all see that in the back? We have the technology. Don't worry. I'm going to make it bigger. Okay, that's my button. There you go. So that is your basic kind canonical Spring Boot application. I'm going to go ahead and build something nauseatingly boring. The example I always do is that of OpenTable. How many of you have heard of OpenTable? The whole point is that it's a restaurant reservation thing, and I always kind of wonder what access database they use to build it, because it's like, okay, I need a name and a foreign key, and that's the business, right? So we're going to do something about as simple, or no, it's going to be even simpler, reservation, and it's going to be a JPA entity, like so. Go away, seriously. Entity, like so. It's going to be private long ID, private string reservation name. Okay, come on. Java, right? So Java, got a Java. Got to have your accessors, got to have your constructors. It's not Java without the noise. ID, out generated value, here we are. Okay, voila. I'm going to add some constructors because object orientation. I'm going to add another constructor because JPA is awful. Why JPA? Why? Right? I'm going to add to string. Here we are. I'm going to add nothing else. And so that's my basic Pojo entity type thingy. Close that out. I'm going to create a simple repository that I can use to handle backend logic, you know, or backend CRUD style repository logic, create, read, update, and delete. I'm going to say reservation repository extends JPA repository. And again, I could have just as easily used a Mongo repository or indeed any of the other Spring Data projects. They just don't have out-of-the-box Spring Boot support, so I could have used Cassandra or Couchbase or whatever. The JPA repository interface provides methods like find all, giving a sorting condition, find all, given a collection of IDs, delete in batch, etc. And then I can go back here. I can also add convention-centric finder methods. So for example, reservation find by reservation name. This more or less translates into a query of the form select all from reservations where reservation name equals RN. And then I'm going to create a simple bean. This is an object provider method basically. So it's a method that will get invoked when the context starts up. Spring will take the result value and then manage it as a bean. In this case, I'm going to create a bean of type command line runner. Command line runner is a simple object that has one job, which is that when the context is started, it's going to execute the body of the method here, and it's going to pass in the public static void main string argument array as the arguments. Of course, if you know anything about Java 8, how many of you know about Java 8? Java 8. So we have this FABU support for lambdas. I like lambdas. Lambdas are awesome. Insert expletive there. I should mention, of course, that that C++, a language whose governing body met but once every few years, got lambdas before we did. So head slump and some shame is appropriate here. But nonetheless, we have them now, and they're awesome. So I can now go ahead and revise this a little bit. I can say like that. And there we go. And of course, this is type inference. Yay, we have type inference. So I can get rid of the types because it's going to coalesce this lambda into the interface of type command line runner. And then now I can actually say, okay, I want to inject an instance of type reservation repository, like so. Okay, and it's just going to be R in the interests of space. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to say I'm going to say actually arrays.as list Peter, Josh, and we're going to go to we're going to all be invited. We're all going to have a reservation. We're going to say for each name in the list, we're going to say repository or r.save new reservation, like so. And then we're going to say name, pass that in. And then I'm going to say r.find all. I'm going to say give me all the reservations in the database. And then for each one, I'm going to tell Java to call the print line method, passing in each instance in the data in the collection. So very, very basic data access stuff. And the point is that we're going to actually persist all this stuff, and we'll have something to look at in the database. I am going to do something to impress you, but I will impress upon you also that this is not actually all that required. So you can, of course, say reservation REST controller, like so, and then do auto-wired, like that, and say, okay, private reservation repository, like that. Don't ever do this, never, ever, ever, not even when you're all alone by yourself at home and nobody's looking. I'm using field level injection. That's a no-no. It's certainly not very testable. It's ugly, but again, screen real estate is a factor here, okay? So here we are, reservations, okay, collection, reservation, good. And I'm going to say return this dot, I know, okay, repository, find all, and all I'm going to do is return all the records in the database using that method there. Okay. The last thing I need is a database. I could explicitly define a data source object, but instead I'll let Spring Boot do the hard work. I'll include the H2 embedded in-memory database, and Spring Boot will automatically configure a data source that points to that if there's no otherwise explicitly configured data source present. And when I run it, I will hold carefully. Now, you'll note that of course, this worked, right? I don't make mistakes. I don't know about you, but I don't. More importantly, much more importantly, look at that ASCII artwork. I don't know if you can appreciate how awesome this is, but we have 2 PhDs on the Spring team, 2 people that were literally rocket scientists in their previous lives, and it tickles me to no end to think that at some point, some of them got a GitHub issue or a Jira saying, God darn it, we need good ASCII artwork. Look at that. That is good stuff, good stuff. It helps tame the savage Node.js developer. If you want to get on their level, bring the ASCII artwork, and we did. So this is up and running. Localhost reservations, like so. And there you go, nothing fancy, you know, we did that. Again, I mentioned that I did that just to impress you. The reason I did that to impress you is because I don't actually even really need all that. I can go back to my Palm thingy here, add dependency, you know, Spring Boot starter data rest, like so. Go back to my code, add rest repository resource, Command-Alt-L, and then run the code again. And you'll see that now we've got a declarative REST endpoint. So these are just some of the things that Spring Boot does well. It basically, you saw no configuration. You saw me doing absolutely nothing to get it all working. There are even niceties, like, so here's the modified super duper HotOS compliant REST API, for example. I could have used WebSockets, for example. I also get things like the metrics, which give me a dump of all the status of the application. I get the env, which gives me the state of the application right now on the system it's running. I get just a whole bunch of things that I can use for operations perspective, right? So that's the beauty of Spring Boot. It eliminates the configuration and it makes it overridable. What we have now is a Spring Boot and Vaadin integration. So just as easily as I set up JPA, and I could have set up security and WebSockets and data integration and anything else, we can do Vaadin. There are some small mom and pop customers who are using Spring Boot already very heavily. How many of you have heard of Netflix? Netflix, anybody? Okay, okay. Ticketmaster, $50 million an hour going through lots of Spring Boot microservices. Anybody here? Okay, yeah, okay, I'm just saying, it's gonna be big. You just watch, it's gonna be big. Okay, next.
All right, so having this kind of a power of abstraction from Spring, and when we know that we're using Vaadin on the server side on top of JVM with very server-centric approach, combining these 2 technologies is something that you really would and should want to do. And this is now very much possible. There's currently a project going on called Vaadin for Spring, which will be the official Vaadin and Spring integration add-on. It's still in development, but most likely will be released at some point, maybe during this year.
Yeah, here's hoping. I just have to fix some bugs.
So what this actually means is that we have a specially crafted Spring Boot Vaadin starter, which will set you up with all the dependencies just the way you need them. It'll set up all the Spring dependencies as well as the Vaadin related dependencies, and it also includes the add-on just to integrate these 2 technologies. So out of this, what should be interesting is that we will use the Spring Boot starter for web as the one dependency, and another artifact called Spring Boot Vaadin for the actual Vaadin integration.
That sets up an auto configuration, right?
Yeah.
So it'll set up the servlet for Vaadin. It'll set up the filters. It'll set up basically all the common things that you would have to do in a regular servlet application. It's still a servlet application behind the scenes, but we're running embedded Tomcat or embedded Undertow or embedded Jetty. If you want to deploy it as a WAR, of course you can do that, but by default it's a jar. Yeah. So you're getting all the same machinery. It's just you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. So one of the main things that it'll give you are these 3 annotations. And not just annotations, but in a way it enables you to use the Vaadin UI class or TouchKit UI in such a way that they are actually Spring managed beans. And since Spring beans are of course always bound to some kind of a scope. Vaadin UI needs to be sort of deployed into its own UI scope, since otherwise, for example, injections of other beans would get messed up unless they were actually auto-wired or injected into the specific Vaadin UI instance.
Well, UI in Vaadin implies it's not global, right?
No, it's mainly a browser tab.
Yeah, exactly.
So for every browser tab, you get a different instance of the UI. So that's why we also need the scoping for that. TouchKit UI is, by the way, something that is mainly a UI that has better support for touch-based devices with Vaadin TouchKit add-on. So as mentioned, all these will be Spring-managed beans. And another thing that you will get is a specially crafted event bus for just loosely coupling all the different beans and just being able to access different events and methods from different modules just by firing events at the actual event bus.
So it's worth mentioning all of the interesting business logic in Vaadin lives on the server. This is not like
exactly.
It's not like GWT. So you can use everything you can do in Java 8, Spring, whatever, Java 6, 7. It's all on the server side here, so you don't lose any fidelity.
Exactly. So as you saw already from the Josh's previous example, this is the very simple application star class that you annotate with the Spring Boot application annotation, as well as enable TouchKit servlet annotation. And this TouchKit servlet annotation is of course now something special that comes with the Vaadin for Spring add-on, and we're also using this just to be able to actually run our drone controller application on any touch device, for example on an iPad. Another thing that Josh already showed you is the definition of beans. So whenever somebody in the application wants to inject, for example, the drone or a drone template, these methods will be invoked. And for example, the task executor, that is the parameter here, will automatically inject the available task executor bean at that point.
Which Spring Boot will wire up for you.
Yeah. So the interesting part here were the actual annotations, as well as the ability to define beans without really needing to use them in this particular context at the moment. This is now on the actual Vaadin UI that you already very, very briefly saw when we were testing our drone. So interesting things here is that we annotate this with the TouchKit UI, which was one of the annotations coming from the Vaadin for Spring, as well as we extend from the UI class. And just with these pretty simple operations, we have a fully functional Vaadin mobile device compatible UI. And since we're now using the Spring integration, we can very simply auto-wire all the other dependencies into our actual Vaadin application. If we a little bit scroll down our UI, a few other things which we copy-pasted from our code into this example are, for example, the parts in which we listen for the events from the event bus. So we can, just by annotating a method with event bus listener method annotation and defining a proper event type for the method parameter, get this method invoked automatically when an event is fired into the event bus. So this is one of the absolutely amazing powers of Spring, for example, with Vaadin.
Very nice component model. But it sure is boring.
Yeah.
Sure is boring. I think we should...
Should we fly that?
Yeah, let's do it. Come on.
Let's see.
That's what I came here for.
Hopefully it'll work.
Don't say that. Don't jinx it, man.
Yeah.
Okay, now, we haven't killed anybody with this thing yet. There are lasers mounted on the thing. I'm not saying that they're live, but, you know, you've been warned. Okay.
Don't sue us.
Yeah, that works, right? You can just say it, that it's dangerous and you shouldn't be here.
There's this classic effect of crowded Wi-Fi. Let's just very quickly see if we can turn it back on.
You can do it. So while he's getting that up and running, does anybody have any questions? I have questions. I was paying attention, and I still have questions. I expect somebody of you must. Anybody? Bueller.
2 seconds.
2 seconds.
Now it'll work.
Yes.
We hope so.
Eureka.
Oh yes. So what you can see there are, for example, the 2 chalk dial quit widgets. And as you see, I'm currently using a gamepad. So this is another nice benefit of using, for example, a web browser, since Chrome, which we're using as a browser here, can, for example, provide us a gamepad events which we read with the chalk dial widgets from Vaadin actual Vaadin client-side widgets and transport them over the Vaadin communication mechanism to the actual server-side instance of our application. As you see, I'm a little bit afraid of flying it too close to your direction. So
the lasers. It's
yeah,
for
the
your
lasers
protection.
are very dangerous. And for example, when we were flying this thing back at the Pivotal office during the June and July when we were developing this, we really killed pretty many flowers.
Oh yeah. Oh, the potted plant side.
So just to tell you, it really is alive. It flies. And
that way.
That way. Okay. So you can actually fly pretty fast with that as well. So the range is the actual Wi-Fi range, and I think everybody saw how it should behave.
How do you disarm the lasers? Because it looks like it's, oh, okay, thank goodness. Goodness. That was the coolest thing I've seen all hour, by far. So that's a good segue. I think you should probably, the magic trick. How did you make your GWT and Vaadin app?
Yeah, so we sort of established our stack of technologies, and we told what you can do with the Vaadin, with the Spring, but how do they work together? Before going exactly into that, let's just see the physical layer, what we're dealing with. So the actual drone emits its own Wi-Fi base signal that allows us to connect, for example, this particular laptop to the same network as the actual drone. So in the laptop, we of course have the JVM running and the Vaadin UI on top of the Spring Boot application with the fancy integration add-on we were telling. So one of the features of Spring Boot is that it'll enable you to run standard Java applications which actually come with embedded web server.
Right, Jetty in this case, but it could be Red Hat, Wildflies, Undertow, or Tomcat.
Anything.
Yeah.
Just by changing the dependencies from the POM XML.
Yep.
And
Java minus jar instead of deploying to a server.
Yeah, exactly.
Nicer.
And then we of course have our laptop with the Chrome that we use to connect to the actual Vaadin application just to be able to transmit all the events to the actual drone and to our JVM. So if we consider then the software layer, what we have is a Vaadin UI, which is now the TouchKit UI for mobile devices as a Spring Bean, and it comes with certain GWT widgets which enable us to, for example, read the events from the browser just to react to the gamepad controller. We have some gauges, so you, for example, saw the battery level. Other things we can monitor from this thing are, for example, the current heading, the altitude of the thing, Wi-Fi signal strength.
How are you connecting the jog dial to the browser, what API are you using?
On the browser level, it's currently reading either the touch events or then the gamepad events coming from the browser.
Is there an HTML5 API for that, or?
Yeah, they're actually not directly HTML5, but GWT supports, for example, reading these kind of events.
It looks like keyboard events, basically, to the client. Okay.
Yeah. And these events we then transmit to our server-side Vaadin UI instance, which will then listen for these and fire our own event logic on the server side just to be able to control the drone. We have the drone as a Spring Bean. So this is mainly an item with properties for our Vaadin UI. So when we, for example, move our controls, the jog dials, we're effectively changing the properties of the drone item. So it's a way of doing data binding with Vaadin. And the drone item will forward this information to another singleton Spring Bean, which is the drone template. So templating is sort of a Spring way of defining a pattern. For example, JPA templates, as you were showing them. And what really happens inside is that the drone template connects to the IP of the actual drone and will send UDP packets to it. So whenever something changes on the browser, we will send the events all the way to the Vaadin server-side UI, out of which it'll travel by the actual drone item, which is the bean, all the way to the drone template. And from there, we will create UDP packets, which then represent the controls of the drone.
It's worth mentioning that by far the hardest part was that stupid drone template, because we had to write the protocol It's actually a TCP protocol client that we had to write.
Vaadin and Spring are easy.
Yeah, that part was like, we're done in the first half hour. Now what?
Exactly.
It doesn't do much, but it was already done. Then the drone template took like a week. So.
Yeah. And then the proper way of actually listening something from the drone is the usage of our event bus. So the actual drone template doesn't really need any of these things right here. Instead, the only thing that it'll need to be able to report back is some kind of a state callback. And whenever a state changes, the callback is invoked, and we have a special UI event producer that will fire the corresponding events to our UI event bus, which different Vaadin drone UIs can then listen for.
That's the event bus listener annotation you saw earlier?
Exactly.
Those callback methods?
Yeah. And what this enables us to do is that I mentioned that every Vaadin UI is a separate browser tab, separate UI instance. And we still, as these are Spring beans, have the drone template as a singleton bean. So with this mechanism, it's actually possible to have multiple UIs, for example, viewing the state of a single drone, but still there is only one real controller bean that actually interacts with the drone over the network.
Yep.
So another great way of utilizing the power of Spring with
dependency
Vaadin.
injection, scoping.
So this is now the actual state callback that is annotated with a @ component, just to be able to tell Spring that we want to use this as through a component scan, so we actually find it. And interesting part here is our event bus mechanism. So we will auto-wire our event bus into this actual producer in such a way that the scope of the event bus will be application. And what this means is mainly that all the events that get fired from here will be delivered to all the UI instances. It doesn't matter whether they are in the same HTTP session even. There could be different people viewing the state of the drone from different workstations, or they might have multiple tabs open in their browser. Doesn't matter which one. As long as they are still in the same application instance, they will all get the events.
Right. An application in this case is a logical concept.
Yeah.
It's not
It's the thing that we started with the Spring Boot application.
Exactly.
When we deployed it on the server or just started the main Java application instance. Then the interesting part here is that when the drone state changes, we will invoke the onDroneStateChanged method with the current drone state, and just with simple logic check whether there is some kind of an emergency event or, for example, a low battery event, and just fire a corresponding event to the event bus. And then our different widget controls on the server side can listen for these with the event bus listener method, and since this effectively changes the state of the server-side Vaadin application, the client side will automatically get updated with the latest and greatest state.
Vaadin takes care of that bit
Yeah.
for you. If it changes on the server, the client knows about it.
Exactly.
Don't have to worry about how.
So you will never ever have to recompile your widget set when you're doing these kind of things, since everything comes built in with Vaadin widgets. Of course, we had to recompile it once, and that was because we introduced our own jog dial widget. But other than that, we're using only the core widgets from the actual framework. This is the very simple API of the drone template. So things that we have here are mainly the taking off and landing, as well as moving to all three dimensions. Yeah. So pretty simple. And when you, for example, let's see if it'll work. Just a second. What happened? Okay, never mind. I can get back to that later. So, okay, now this stopped working. Interesting.
Did it freeze?
Yeah.
Oh.
It won't let me any other direction. Uh-oh. Very scary. So anyway, I would have just shown you that you, for example, could flip the drone around to create an emergency event when the axis turn into such angles that the drone thinks that it has lost control. At that point, we would have fired an emergency event, which we would have shown on the UI, and that would have been rendered as a dialog in the Vaadin application, which has a simple button called Reset Emergency, and clicking that would simply just send the request to server side, which eventually gets transmitted all the way through the drone template to reset the emergency state of the drone.
It is actually, okay, so Keynote has given us a Dear John letter.
Yeah, all right. Well, amazing time for a Mac to crash.
It's okay. We made it through the hard bits.
Yeah.
So
Only thing we would have said anymore is how to get started, and we would have shown you a very nice photo of us writing the app, but since it doesn't seem to want to show the app,
well, ooh.
No way.
It literally won't escape from Keynote. It just won't move.
Yeah. So I think that, despite of this, we managed to tell everything that
Nicely done, sir.
we wanted to do. And
any questions? There's got to be at least, yeah.
I was just wondering what triggers the state callbacks from the drone. What is it? Is it a polling mechanism, or how does that work?
The question was?
Yeah, what triggers the state callbacks from the drone? So in the application class, we had one bean that had, for example, the task executor as a parameter. And when we start the application, we have the task executor, which enables us using threads on the actual drone template. So there is mainly a thread pool out of which the drone template gets a thread for navigation data and for control data. And whenever the navigation data thread just reaches the state of the drone, it will always, at that point, invoke the callback from the application.
So there's no coupling directly, it's all through callbacks on this client.
So are you sort of polling the state of the drone and then pushing the callbacks?
In the implementation itself, what are we doing?
So what we're doing is that the task executor is polling the state of the drone on the server side of the application, and then the actual change of the state, which will reflect to some changes in the Vaadin UI components, those will get transmitted all the way back to the browser, either with HTTP responses or with Vaadin push mechanism over the WebSockets, depending on which you're currently using. So if you wanted to, for example, do the request-response kind of cycles, then you would have to set up your browser with some kind of a polling mechanism, but you could just as well use push to enable WebSockets and just to read the state to your actual web browser from the server.
Oh, huh. Okay.
It works. Amazing. Cool. Hey, this is what we wanted to show. Just stay there. So first point being, drones are super cool, as you noticed. Would you agree? Yes.
Agreed? Can we get a thumbs up on that one? Okay, drones for the win. Nobody died. You have nothing to complain about.
Then for writing applications mainly on some real business needs or for controlling drones, you can use Vaadin. On the backend side, using Spring or with Spring Boot gives you really high abstraction level on many architectural things. Yeah. And
less fuss.
Last one is interesting. There's a saying in Finland that if you really screw up on something, you will be taken behind the sauna. So that practically means that somebody's killing you for doing a bad job. So Vaadin does not very well suit for creating web pages. And doing that combined with Spring Boot is like
it's nasty.
No go. Yeah.
I mean, you can use Spring Boot, but if you're trying to build a web app, that's the point. You need to think about these technologies together.
This is an application, not a web page.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If you want the animated GIF and the applet, that's your web page from 1998. You know.
So don't do that.
Yep.
Otherwise, we will
carry you behind the sauna.
Exactly. Oh, there's the photo.
Yay.
So drone is flying. We're happy.
Did you see it taking aim at us though? Wait, like a few seconds later, it turned around and then it started blinking, and then the lasers.
It
wasn't great. It wasn't our best move.
Exactly. Don't tell me this jammed here.
There.
Cool. And there's the important URLs. So you can find the actual drone control application from Vaadin's GitHub under the name called Teleport. Then Vaadin.com/demo tells you everything about how to create Vaadin applications, what comes with Vaadin core distribution. StartSpring.io is the utility that you already showed how to generate the POM XML with the dependencies that you want to use.
You don't really need it, but you saw it saved you a good maybe 2 minutes of typing. So
exactly.
That's all.
And the Vaadin for Spring is the add-on that is currently in development to really allow the integration of Spring with Vaadin.
Right. And there's Twitter. If you have questions, feedback, ideas, we're happy to carry the discussion online, carry it forward online, so don't hesitate.
And in the GWT.create agenda page, you can actually review and rate all the talks that you've seen today. So please go there and
come on, be honest.
Tell us your thoughts.
Was this not the best talk you've seen this hour in this room? Come on. Easily, right? Yeah, there you go. I knew it.
All right. Thank you very much. And